Okay, so I'm responding to question one, which is imagine that you are the director of a U.S. environmental NGO with funds and permission to construct a carbon capture project in Xinjiang, China. Your organization's usual practice is to hold a series of public forums to solicit input on your project, and the Chinese authorities have indicated that they are willing to let you put on these forums. However, reports from Xinjiang suggest that participants could be at risk of physical harm if they publicly speak out against the project. What would you do? So this question is really asking about how an NGO coming from a country that practices democratic environmentalism can actually inflict real change in a country that practices authoritarian environmentalism without necessarily risking the lives and the well-being of the participants. It's also asking what other options there are for an NGO other than organizing public forums if they want to solicit input and make real change on projects such as those in Xinjiang, China. So this is important and worth discussing because this is a real problem of authoritarian environmentalism in that people actually don't have an adequate enough say and they are limited to what the government's initiatives are, and if they try to speak out they could be in real danger and put themselves in harm's way. So the first point that I want to make, which is pivotal to this question, is understanding what the roles of NGOs traditionally are and what would and wouldn't work in this kind of system. So NGOs traditionally raise awareness, spread information, collect funds, and raise money, pressure policymakers, advocate for policies. They encourage citizen participation. They have election involvement. They write policies and they set standards. So which of these agendas can actually be accomplished in an authoritarian environmental system? So first, you cannot rely on pressuring policymakers, advocating for policies, election involvement, and writing policies. The reason you can't rely on any of these is because these all involve citizen participation in government, which authoritarian regimes inherently do not allow. So you can't necessarily have people get involved in elections because there are no elections to be had, or no legitimate ones at that. You also can't really pressure policymakers because lobbying is not a real thing, and you can't necessarily advocate for policies because that would put you in harm's way, and you can't really do that anonymously. And writing policies based on my analysis of the previous three ideas is totally out of the question. You can, however, rely on raising awareness so people can tell their neighbors, their friends, they could post and spread information. This goes hand in hand with the idea of spreading information, which is another strategy that NGOs use and something else that they do to solicit input and actually impact change. And NGOs can also still collect funds anonymously. You can both collect and you can give money anonymously. And then people can also participate in non-public forums. So there's ways to have these meetings anonymously. That would come in the form of maybe canvassing, where you go door to door educating people. So it wouldn't really be called a forum, but it's a way to get information. People can also help to set standards among their peers, and strategies that can be utilized include putting out calls for action and fundraising, getting volunteers for related projects. So for example, figuring out ways to involve citizens in reducing air pollution in ways that might not necessarily be related to PX plants, but that kind of target the overall issue. So that could be spreading info about what causes air pollution in like a home, and getting people to take initiative on that. Another strategy that can be utilized is collaborating with the government. So collaborating is one of the three C's, being collaboration, competition, condemnation, and this is probably of the three what authoritarian governments would most likely respond best to with regards to involving NGOs. So in collaborating with citizens and with the government, so the NGO can collaborate with citizens directly or with the government directly. The aforementioned processes of getting an NGO involved in inflicting real change can cause an NGO to come from a democratic environmentalist background and have an impact on the authoritarian environmentalist systems without necessarily putting people in harm's way. This also kind of addresses the question of what alternatives to public forum can look like, as I've laid out a plethora of different ways that it could look. So one example, which I kind of touched on earlier, but which I can elaborate a little bit on now, is that canvassing door to door to advocate for a cause and to collect money could be a specific way that you could gain awareness for an issue like air pollution in Xinjiang. So this would allow people to participate in a way that the government couldn't necessarily stop, or that they couldn't get people in trouble for or cause physical pain to people for. So people can go door to door. Mostly, I would assume this would be people from the NGO, but it's possible for citizens to be involved as well. And these people can anonymously collect money and anonymously give money without their name attached to it, so that the NGO has finances to spend money on helpful initiatives. An alternative perspective, so I'll offer a couple. One would be that there's no way to inflict change and to get people involved in an authoritarian environmentalist system if you are a democratic, environmentally based NGO. I don't really buy into this argument. I think that there's always a way to get people involved. I don't think that the type of system you're in necessarily restricts the notion of involving people. I think that it could make it more difficult, but it doesn't eliminate it. Another would be to proceed in the same manner you would as normal through public forum, and I just think this isn't worth it because it puts people in harm's way. I was thinking about the example of Alejandro Gonzalez Davidson and what he did in Cambodia, and that shows that the authoritarian governments will not hesitate to use violence if it is in their best interest, and I just don't think that it's worth it in the specific example of Xinjiang or with PX plants in general in China to have a democratic environmentalist NGO actually cause harm to people. So because of these counter arguments, I think the best way is to stick to the proposed courses of actions that I talked about.